If you could tell us a bit about how you see the situation in Afghanistan, how things unfolded, especially since you were in government for part of the withdrawal decision period.
Well, first, I want to make sure that before this panel is over, that Will Ruger can explain what a reserve naval officer was doing in Afghanistan. I mean, we have the U.S. Coast Guard running around in the Western Pacific and the Persian Gulf. I haven't figured out why the Coast Guard is over there doing those things, so we need to find out what the Navy was doing in Afghanistan. I'm not being totally facetious, by the way. By the time that I arrived, which was really on the 9th of November, until the inauguration in late January, it was very obvious to virtually everyone in the senior military establishment, that is the senior ranks of the armed forces, that the Afghan adventure had become essentially entropic. Everything had run out of steam. Everything was overwhelmed with corruption inside the country. Nothing was really functioning as people were led to believe. So leaving the place was not a question of if, it was a question of when. And the idea, as it turned out, was to, in the senior ranks, was to prolong this stay in Afghanistan as long as possible. So when I arrived and I had this to-do list from President Trump, the first item on the to-do list was get us out of Afghanistan. So in response to that, first thing I said was, the president will have to sign an order. And I met with the acting Secretary of Defense and he agreed. Yes, the president will have to give me an order. Anyone who is not confirmed through the Senate for that specific job is not going to be in a position to simply say the president wants us to leave, we're all leaving. So I drafted an order, and that order was eventually signed on the 11th of November at about 2 in the afternoon. And it was modified somewhat. I had said that we could get out by the 31st of December, and that was based on my discussions with people at the lieutenant colonel and colonel levels. And also because there was an agreement, unspoken agreement, that was the best time to leave. If you were going to leave, it was during the winter, because the passes were full of snow and the probability of difficulties with local tribesmen, ISIS, or anyone else was low. So based on that, I sent it over. They modified it from 31 December to 15 January, which is fine. I wanted 2 more weeks. The president signed that order. That order went out on the 12th. Now, the interesting thing is when the order was signed on the 11th, which was a holiday, the individual on the NSC staff who took the order over to the NSC staff, the National Security Advisor, walked out of the White House waving it. People were coming out of the windows cheering and saying, it's taken us 4 years, we've finally done it, which tells you something about the frustrations inside the NSC staff for many people. The following day, on the 12th, there was essentially an outrage almost everywhere that you could think of, primarily from the so-called defense hawks on the Hill, led principally by Mitch McConnell, as well as by the National Security Advisor O'Brien, who violently opposed departure, along with virtually everyone in the Department of Defense who was at the senior level. No one supported it, especially General Milley was adamantly opposed to it. All went to see the president, along with the acting Secretary of Defense, who buckled quickly and said, no, I think we should not leave, along with his chief of staff. Everyone agreed in the room, except for President Trump, who was there with them, we should stay. And unfortunately, President Trump finally said, well, can I take half the forces out? And everyone said, well, okay, we'll support half. So that opportunity was missed and lost because of the president. The president could have ordered it, it would have been executed. I think we'd have been better off. But nevertheless, we would still have had problems for the reasons that you saw subsequently. The same people were still in charge after President Biden took over in the Department of Defense, and they did a deplorable job of extricating us.
Do you think they've learned anything from this experience?
Absolutely not. First of all, when you say we, who is we? We is really the people inside the Beltway, people at the top of the federal bureaucracy, people at the top of the military, the political figures. No, they haven't learned anything, because if you're going to learn something, you learn very early on that you don't want to occupy anything under any circumstances. mean, the great achievement of the British Empire was realizing that the way to govern was through other people, principally indigenous people. No one wants a foreigner telling them what to do. We didn't do that. Genghis Khan used to say, occupations turn soldiers into jailers. He was absolutely right. So the big mistake was staying in Afghanistan once it became clear that we had missed Osama bin Laden and his inner circle, all of whom had retired to Pakistan. Now this gets to the other point why we learn nothing. There is no accountability for anything. If there's no accountability, there's no performance. Who was responsible for, quote unquote, getting Osama bin Laden and the inner circle back in 2001? It was General Franks, who at the time was the U.S. CENTCOM commander. He failed. And you have to stop and back away for a second. Remember, you have this thing called the Defense Intelligence Agency, the Central Intelligence Agency, the National Security Agency. To this, you have to add in the Special Operations Command and Special Operations Forces. How could we, having spent billions on these institutions, enormous quantities of money, manage to do that? Well, I won't go into detail today, but no one was ever held accountable for that. So you end up with this decision. The reason we came here is no longer there, so we're going to stay. And people made terrible decisions about what to do if you stayed. And one of the first decisions was, well, we'll conduct search and destroy missions inside Afghanistan. Inside Afghanistan, when there was no enemy inside Afghanistan. The overwhelming majority of people had no interest in us whatsoever. So the question is, where did search and destroy come from? Vietnam. Who made that decision? The 18th Airborne Corps Commander, General McNeil, who later was rewarded for that stupidity with a 4-star. I mean, we could sit here and go on and on and on. People lost interest in Afghanistan, but the main thing was we're staying there. When there should never have been any interest in remaining there, and in my judgment, anywhere else in the Muslim world. We should have confined our focus to the things that we thought were really important. And in our case, that was Osama and a small number of people. So that, I think, is the great lesson to be learned, but I see no evidence that anyone inside the Beltway has learned that, nor would I expect them to, because it's also a larger issue about money. And we can talk about that, I hope, with the panel. Where did all the money go, the trillions of dollars? Most of it was repatriated here, but not to the American people.